Hey guys, today is going to be a little story time. Erica's taking a little break this week, and I thought I'd do a kind of a Chris tells all. But seeing as Erica has told everybody about how we met, I'm going to talk more about my music career and how that all happened. So one question that I do get asked from time to time, and it's certainly a question I ask myself from time to time, is the question, if I had to do it all over again, would I do anything differently? And I'm speaking as an instrumental artist here. I'm not talking as a pop artist. So in order to answer that question, I think I've got to tell you how I did do it, how I got this far, because things did work out for me. And let's talk about that first, and then we can talk about the things I might do differently now, because we're living in a different world. So let's start from the beginning. I started classical guitar at a very young age. I was about 6 years old. And of course, as a youngster, those lessons were torturous, but we did it anyway. And I took weekly classical guitar lessons until I was old enough to go to boarding school for 4 years. And my parents sent me to boarding school because my grades were really bad. So I went there, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not only did I have a great time at the school, but I met some kids, and we all were into music. And I joined a few bands, and we played some concerts at the school. And it was a great learning experience. Everybody was very supportive. I discovered rock and roll. You know, I think I studied from a book called Lead Guitar by Harvey Vinson. That was the very first book I ever got on rock and roll, and it was a game changer. I really got into it. So anyway, 4 years of school went by, and at the end of it, I was very confident and in my limited abilities. But you know, that's what happens when you're a teenager. You get this boost of confidence. And at the end of it, I remember speaking to my mother on the phone, and she said, "Well, darling, what are you going to do now with your life?" And I said, "Well, I think I want to move to London and join a pop band." And I had these grandiose aspirations of doing just that, like getting a little bedsit flat in London and picking up a copy of Melody Maker, which was the weekly music magazine at the time. And there was a classified section at the back that all musicians looked at in the hopes of getting an audition for a band or putting one together, you know. So anyway, my mother heard this, and she said to me, "I don't think you're going to do that." And she thought about it for a while, and so did I. And she decided that a good idea for me was, if I was going to make a living as a musician, perhaps I should get qualified in it. And I have to say that that was a very good idea. So I went to community college in my hometown of Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, England. And I signed up to do A-level music, which was, you know, one of the exams that you take in order to get to university. So, but I had to take two other exams. So I took grade 8 theory of music, grade 8 classical guitar, which was the equivalent of an A-level music. And what else did I do? I took A-level art, go figure. And get this, A-level pottery. Oh my God, 3 art classes, which I was in heaven because, you know, Mr. Creative. But what I really wanted to do was have an excuse to practice the classical guitar and be in town and meet some guys and, you know, further my electric guitar fascination and all that. So, community college for 2 years. I passed all my exams, and I then took a year off. And during that year, I came out to California, and I spent about 9 months just kind of hitchhiking around and ending up in LA. And I discovered a little club called the Baked Potato. And I would see these fabulous musicians like Larry Carlton, Steve Lukather, and I saw the Yellow Jackets when they were all in their 20s. I mean, they were just coming out. And it was an amazing time. So for me, I got super inspired. I did that for 9 months. I worked in a little sandwich shop. I I delivered sandwiches, I made them and stole them, and it was a great time. But I was in LA, got my own little apartment, got a car, and after about 9 months, I decided I'm going back to London to go to music college. Before I left, I had auditioned at the London College of Music, and the guy who auditioned me was Andrew Lloyd Webber's father. And I remember it vividly. He looked just like him. And I had to, play some classical guitar. And anyway, he passed me, and I got accepted, and I went to the London College of Music to study primarily with this great classical guitar teacher, Robert Brightmore, for 3 years, which I did. To me, it was an excuse, literally just to stay at home and practice. And once a week, I would get on a train and go out to Kilburn, North London, and have my classical guitar lesson with Bob Brightmore. And I was in heaven for 3 years. I just woke up in the morning and I practiced my Bach preludes and fugues in the morning. I'd have a bite to eat, a cup of coffee, and I'd jump straight back in, and I'd be practicing all this jazz that I was learning on my own for the most part. So I went to music college, and at the end of 3 years, I came out with 3 performing diplomas, LLCM, which is licentiate, what was the other one? ALCM, associate, and finally FLCM, which is a fellowship. Now, I don't know what all this means, but I can tell you the fellowship was a really, really hard diploma to pass, because the whole idea was I actually had to play a solo classical guitar recital for 1 hour in the main hall at the music school with all the students in the audience who wanted to come and watch, plus 4 judges. Now, I don't think of anything more pressurizing I've ever done to this day than that. But as a youngster, I was pretty cocky, and most importantly, I was prepared. I had practiced for a long time for this, and I passed. I got all 3 exams early, in fact. And then, of course, at the end of these 3 years, I stay in London because I'm there. I had met some people. I put a little band together, and I started doing a few gigs around town. It took a long, long time for me to meet people in order to get them to call me. I mean, also, I was ambitious, but maybe not fully aware of my limitations as a musician yet. But I think it's the sort of naive enthusiasm and ambition that kind of drives us at that age. And thank God for it. Anyway, so I ended up doing some tours. I did a wonderful tour with my friend Paul Carmichael, who was the bass player in Alan Holdsworth's band. We went up and down the country doing that. I did a bunch of TV sessions. There was a show called Spitting Image that I did. Rita Rudner's TV show. I played a whole bunch of West End shows following conductors, because my sight reading was very good. I was known as a reader. So I got a lot of experience, didn't make a bunch of money. Times were tough back then. It wasn't like I was working every day. I was really waiting for the phone to ring a lot. But I made a lot happen on my own. Anyway, so this was London. And this went on for the next 10 years, during which time I started taking little trips back to Los Angeles, little reconnaissance trips, because I was so wildly ambitious. I wanted to eventually move here, or at least I thought I did. I even made an album in England, in Stoke-on-Trent, I think 1989. And I came out to LA to try and get it taken up by a record company. And I got a lot of responses from people saying, "Oh, it's really great." One guy even said to me, "Yeah, it's all right, nothing to get in bed about." Well, that was the best A&R response ever. But I think the biggest thing was I wasn't in LA, so nobody could really commit to me because I hadn't committed to it yet. Anyway, so I went back to London with my tail between my legs because I couldn't get a record deal. And I decided to spend the next year or two just ensconcing myself in London and just depressingly going forward and trying to make things happen in England. That didn't last long because I think I came out here every year for about 4 years to see if I could get something happening. And finally, in 1991, I booked a trip over here for 4 weeks, and I decided this time I was going to do some gigs while I was here. My playing was really coming along, and I thought, let's do some gigs. So I got to know some guys over here over the years. I don't know how I did it. And I also got to know some promoters during my little reconnaissance visits. So I remember booking 4 venues. I booked a club called Le Café, which no longer exists. I booked a club called At My Place in Santa Monica, which was a great club, which no longer exists. I booked a club called Bon Appetit in Westwood that no longer exists. And, of course, the Baked Potato, which is still thriving today. I also got in touch with the Musicians Institute, which is one of the big schools here in Hollywood, and I got booked to give a seminar. So I had 5 things booked, and I decided that because I was going to be here in LA, I would book my favorite players to play with me, which I did. I booked, who did I book? Jerry Brown on drums, who used to play with Stanley Clarke. Tim Landers on bass, who was played with Al Di Meola. Lee Ritenour, a whole bunch of other people. Freddie Ravel on keyboards, who played with Earth, Wind and Fire, I believe. A great percussionist called Brad Dutz. And myself on guitar, of course. And I wrote out all the charts, and we played these gigs, and it was all very intense fusion music. But the band was killing, and I got a lot of reviews, and I made a big splash when I first moved here. And then, of course, as you can expect, after those gigs finished, so was I for a while. I had to figure out how to really make a proper living, and I was hustling. I was trying to get some students to teach, and every single little restaurant gig I could get, playing classical guitar in the background for tips and a pizza or something. And miraculously, I made it all happen, renting a tiny little studio flat for a couple of years. And anyway, so this went on. I started playing quite a lot with my band and booked some incredible musicians in the first couple of years. Pretty much every famous drummer you can think of got the call in the first couple of years. People like Greg Bissonette, Ralph Humphrey, Randy Drake, Tom Breckline. I mean, it was a great time. Anyway, so I did that for quite a while, and then I met this guitar player called Marc Antoine, who is a pretty established guitar player now, but at the time, I happened to be hanging out with him and his girlfriend and friends of friends and things like that. We had a little social thing going on. I didn't even know he played guitar. I mean, well, I knew he played guitar, but I didn't know he could write or what he was really trying to do. And one day, we were having a pizza at his house, and he said, "Do you want to hear some of my music?" I said, "I'd love to." So he played me this music that he'd been working on, which was terrific. And he told me that he had just been offered a deal with Mike Manieri's record label in New York, which happened just at the right time because he was about to give up and go back to France. Anyway, so I was thrilled for him, and he got a record deal, and they put a single out, and almost instantly he became a success because he was doing something quite forward-thinking, using loops and samples, and not many people were doing that in this genre at the time. Anyway, so he asked me, he said, "Chris, do you want to come and strum for me, and we'll go and do some shows?" I said, "I'd love to. What else am I doing?" So we did some shows for about a year and a half. We toured up and down California, and he became more and more successful. Then, in 1997, and this was a big defining moment for me, there was a tour going out across the country called Guitars, Saxes and More. And it was going to be 4 artists: Rick Braun, Kirk Whalum, Mark Antoine and Peter White, and one band backing all these artists on the stage for a 2-hour show every night. And Mark really, really, went to bat for me to get me in the band, which was fantastic. So we did the tour. Instantly, I met all these 4 guys, became great friends with them. I ended up joining Rick Braun's band for a year and a half. But more importantly, I took that tour as a massive opportunity to get to know everybody out on the road, radio people, promoters, and during that time, I met this wonderful keyboard player, Rodney Lee, through a mutual friend of ours. And Rodney and I had started writing music, and we put some tracks together, and I asked Rick Braun and Kirk Whalum to come and play on the tracks that we had recorded. And they were kind enough to come and do it. And all of a sudden I had an album finished, and I went to shop it around some labels, some independent labels. And I got offered a little record deal with a acid jazz label in New York called Instinct Record. And because I was playing with Rick, I'd done this tour, and I'd got Rick and Kirk on my album, they saw this as an opportunity to launch me as an artist. And that was the beginning. I put a single out called Cool Shades. It was my very first single in 1998, and it went to number 8 on the chart. And suddenly, I was considered an artist. I saw myself going down that path, but more importantly, my phone stopped ringing to be a sideman. And of course, I wasn't really aggressively hustling people to play with them, as a sideman, because I was really concentrating on being an artist. It took a long, long time. I ended up with, I think I signed 4 record deals in the first 5-6 years, and then put my own label together. And things have gone very well since. Since I put my label together in 2008, I have released a new album every 2 years, pretty religiously. And so my career has never done that. You know what I mean? It's never gone from like overnight success, which I've watched some people do. But it has done this. It's slowly but surely gone in the right direction. And I've had a very nice career. I think one of the reasons I started my own label was so I could be more comfortable. And also, I've got a bit of a business head, and I'm interested in the business side of things as much as I am creative. So I'm actually cut out to have a record company as well, I think. And so here we are in 2026, and that is kind of it to date. So the next question is, which is the first question, is what would I do now if I was to start all over again, in this current climate? Because things are very, very different to when I came out in 1991, I think the first thing to say is there are no record companies left. And what record companies are left, I wouldn't be signing to them because they're probably going out of business too. And you do not want to be in a position where you're fighting to get back your masters because you don't have them and there's nobody to talk to. I'm actually in a situation like that right now. But that's not the case now. I mean, there's no record companies to sign to. So I would be starting my label earlier at that juncture. So, and of course there are less playing opportunities. Back in the day, there were a ton of pubs and clubs that you could play for not much money, but as a kid, you just want to play, and it's not about the money. There's still some of that going on, but it's It's far less because probably since COVID, a lot of clubs have gone out of business. They just couldn't survive. And of course, with the environment and the economy, it's kind of hard for some places to exist. Now, some, of course, the more higher end, sort of high profile jazz clubs definitely do still exist, but they're the places like Blue Note and Yoshi's and things like that. And of course, when you're starting out as a musician, the chances are you won't get to play those because you need to be able to bring a following, bring an audience. But what we do have is YouTube and social media. We have TikTok, as much as I hate it. But we're living in a viral world, in a perfect world. If you can go viral, that is the idea. YouTube is fantastic. I mean, you're watching this on YouTube. I mean, what an amazing thing. I mean, back in my day, there was not only were there no cell phones or no internet, there was no social media, there was nothing. In order to get noticed by somebody, if you wanted to get a gig, you had to somehow call them up or meet them at a club, or get recommended somehow. It was very difficult. Whereas it's not that difficult to get noticed now, and you can use that to your advantage. What I would do differently is probably sooner than later, I would probably team up with a business partner so they could take care of the business aspect of my career, so I could concentrate more on the artistic side. It's really hard to do everything on your own. And of course, that wasn't the case back in the day. You didn't need to. You had labels, you had managers, you had this, that, and the other. Now it's artists have to wear a lot of hats, and it can be intense. I do have a business partner now who does all the things that I don't want to do, particularly like booking shows. I might be more aggressive about touring, if at all possible. I think when I started out, I wasn't that aggressive. I did as much as I knew how to do. But the idea of playing on the East Coast, for instance, or several thousand miles away, I couldn't get my head around that. That was a tough thing, and it took me a long, long time to get an agent or even a manager. So that was difficult. So I might be a bit more aggressive about that. I mean, for instance, one of my heroes is Pat Metheny, and I know that back in the day when he started out, he jumped in a van with his band, and they literally just drove across the country and slummed it in the van, and made next to no money because they were on a mission to do it. And I never really did that. I got there in the end. Also, one thing to know is music was everything back in the day. It's a tiny part of everyday lives now. And so grabbing attention is much more difficult. Since the advent of the internet, video games, technology, music is not everything anymore. Basically, when I grew up, we had a television set and we had records to play, or we would go and play in the road with our friends. That was our life. Now it's just music is just a very tiny percentage of people's day-to-day lives, and it's not fascinating anymore to a lot of people. So we have to stay in front of people's faces and do all the things to keep them in our world, and obviously keep making great records. Okay, so things I wouldn't do differently. The one thing that has never changed, despite musicians whining about it, is the idea that back in the day, the only way you could get signed to a record company is if you were writing music that wowed everybody. But more importantly, I mean, you might get a record deal, but you might not have a career unless that music that you were recording was music that people responded to. Now, there's a difference between artistic music and commercial music, and I like to somehow cross the boundary. So I'm artistically happy but I'm making music that people actually want to hear. The one thing that hasn't changed is the idea that you have to write music that people respond to. And if they don't, you aren't going to get a following, and you can't build a career. And I think that's the one thing that a lot of artists don't really connect with subconsciously. They cannot put themselves in the shoes of the listener to see if it's something they might want. I remember when I first moved into town, I was playing these fusion gigs, and I was playing this one club, and as I was playing, I asked myself, if I was in the audience listening to me right now, would I be enjoying it? And you know what the answer was? The answer was no, I would not be. And immediately after that night, I literally canned my band, and I put it on hold for a couple of years, and I went back into the studio to try and figure out this new game plan. I just was torturing myself, and I figured it was too intense and too self-indulgent. I was trying to be clever, and these are the things that don't resonate. Now, the other question is, do you want to write music that is self-indulgent and super artistic? Is it going to be all like fiery guitar or fiery piano, whatever you play? If that's the case, your audience is going to be music students or guitar players or keyboard players or anybody that's fascinated with you because you're doing something miraculously brilliant. Point is, I've never wanted to go down that road. My audience are people that know nothing about music, and that's the way I want it. And I think at the end of the day, if you want to build an audience, you have to be able to get to people who don't know anything about music and don't need to understand music. So it's important that they feel something emotionally. With that in mind, you have to be able to write a beautiful melody, and you have to be able to put a groove together that makes people want to move or feel good. Many things haven't changed. It's a very entrepreneurial world right now. So what I would do differently, I might be a bit more business-oriented sooner. And the one other thing, finally, I would talk about is, I remember I was sitting in a pub with my friend Peter White, and I was kind of in this acid jazz group called Solar System back in the day. And he said to me, Chris, you need to be a solo artist. You need to put a solo record out. He said there's many more benefits that you can get as an instrumental solo artist than there is in a band. You know, first of all, the band has to stay together. Let's say you're in a band of 4 people. Bands break up all the time. What are you going to do then? You know, unless the band is hugely famous, you're going to be struggling to start again. So I heeded Peter's words, and I immediately started working with Rodney to put my first solo album together. And one of the reasons he was saying this is that you can, as a solo artist, you can guest in situations. You can guest on somebody's album. You can partner with somebody to do a show, or you can be invited on stage as a guest spot to play, you know, because you happen to be in town, and people will know you because they know your name, that you've built a name, so you branded that. So that never left me. That was very, very important information. So to conclude, I would say that if I was to do it all over again in this current climate, there's not much I would do differently. You still need all that experience. I would still be listening to all this beautiful music that I listen to, which is really very much outside the genre that I play in. You know, I'm really into progressive jazz and arrangers, orchestrators. And of course, I come from classical guitar and bebop, so that whole thing fuses together and creates this soup. But yeah, it wouldn't be that different. I think the only difference is the big two things is there's no record companies, and we have social media to help us. Other than that, you've got to stay in people's faces because it's tough to stay noticed or get noticed. But I think the biggest advice I can give any musician watching this is be incredible. There's no excuse for not being an amazing musician. And I would also say that focus on composition, because we have a glut of incredible musicians, like especially guitar players who can play a million miles an hour, but I can't listen to them for more than 2 minutes because they're not saying anything compositionally. They haven't studied writing, so there's no song or there's no piece of music that I can connect to emotionally. So I would say composition is a big thing. So be a fully rounded musician, and best of all, good luck. And with that, I hope you've enjoyed this little story time, got something out of it. I'm sure Erica will be back next week, and we look forward to the next time on Love, Miles and Music. Thanks, guys.